You're listening to the Why That Work podcast presented by StoryBrand.ai. If you've ever wondered why certain brands, trends, or cultural phenomena find success while others don't, you're in the right place. Every week we unpack why something worked, then give you actionable insights that you can use in your own life. Now let's dive in with your hosts, Donald Miller and Kyle Reed.
Kyle, what is the best story you've seen recently? Netflix, movie?
The last great story I watched, this is going to be, do you remember the show Prison Break?
Yeah.
Forever ago?
Marshall Allman was in it, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So I remember watching that a long time ago. And as every married couple does, and sits on the couch and goes, what are we going to watch? And we spend more time searching for something. I saw Prison Break. I asked my wife, have you ever watched Prison Break? She's like, no. I go, I remember it being awesome.
That's funny.
And so we sat down and I go, let's watch it. And my goodness, does that not hold up?
Are you being serious?
Oh, it's so
How many
cheesy.
years? When did you see it?
It was 20 years ago. Easily 20 years ago.
When it came out.
Yes.
But you saw it recently.
Well, we started watching it recently. So I watched it when it first came out. I remember, and I just remember, like, this is the greatest show. Like, this is up there with 24. This is amazing.
And now it's like really
And I watched it and I was
campy.
like, this is horrible. But you know what? My wife, obsessed. She loved it. She stayed up multiple nights in a row till 1 a.m. watching episodes.
Yeah.
And she'd be like, is that okay if I skipped ahead? I go, yeah, you're not hurting my feelings while I'm sleeping. Like, you go watch this. But the last great story I probably watched, though, still was Prison Break, because it actually is.
It's actually good. So you
story.
also say it holds up.
It's a good story.
The story
Yeah,
holds
it's just
up.
so cheesy. It's so cheesy. That's the last great story I watched.
The last great two, and it's been a minute, The Wire.
Yeah.
Did you do HBO's The Wire?
Yes. It was a little before my time of like being able to watch it, but I heard so much about it, I went back and tried to start watching it.
I think it's Baltimore.
Yes.
And it's a story of drug dealing underbelly of Baltimore. So you've got all the cops trying to catch them, the detectives, people know. Funny story about The Wire. I'm at Barack Obama's inauguration. So everybody in front of me is in a seat.
Okay.
So the important people are right in front of me.
And you're behind him, but standing.
And I'm behind. And there's a guy maybe 40 yards. Incredibly kind of charismatic. I couldn't hear him. He's 40 yards away. But he's the happiest guy I've seen in a long time, filled with joy. And I just kind of couldn't take my eyes off him. And 2 days later, I'm in the Dulles airport, flying out. And the place is packed. I mean, packed. Like, you can't even walk through the terminal because people are sitting. And I go to a Burger King, and I'm getting a burger. And there's not an empty seat in this whole airport, and people are sitting on the floors everywhere. And that guy is sitting at a table for two, and there's an empty seat. And I'm in like a 10-minute line to get a burger. And I said to myself, if that seat is open, when I get my burger, I'm going to sit down, and I'm going to say, I watched you for 6 hours in 20-degree weather. I mean, I don't know how. It was so freaking cold. And I get my burger, and that seat's open. And so I walk over, and I go, can I sit down? And he kind of looks at me suspiciously, and he goes, it's an open seat. And I go, I watched you for several hours at the inauguration. And he goes, really? He goes, where were you? I go, I was on the front row. I was the first guy standing. You were also the first guy standing. You were up 40 yards away. He goes, you did watch me. And I go, you were having a day. And he goes, I was. And I said, tell me about it. Tell me about why that meant something so much to you. His grandfather had been lynched, and he's a black man, and this is the first black president. And he just kind of opened up, tear in his eye. Beautiful conversation. Oh. We talked for like 40 minutes. Somebody comes up and they ask for his autograph. And that guy walked away, and I said, I'm sorry, who why would that person want your autograph? He goes, well, I've done some stuff on TV, so people who know me, and it's not that big a deal. And I said, oh, what were you on? He goes, The Wire. And I realized I just watched immediately I went, oh, you're the guy. That's why I watched you. That's why I was like, there's something fascinating about the guys, because I actually spent like hours with him.
Yeah.
Wendell Pierce is the actor's name. Anyway, The Wire, that's an unrelated story. But that dude was awesome. And then Treme might be the second.
Okay.
Might be the second.
I have not watched that, so I feel like I need to go do that.
Trey will hook you, man.
Really?
Yeah, it's New Orleans after Katrina. It's what's his name who got his start on Roseanne?
John Goodman. Yeah.
It's John Goodman.
He's awesome.
Yeah, and Woody Harrelson, I believe, is in that.
That's cool.
And what was fascinating about that show is the plot moved a quarter inch an episode. It's the slowest moving plot of anything I've ever seen, and you can't stop watching it.
There's something special about stories. It's like, on its face, you could have just said, yeah, I was at the inauguration. I saw this gentleman on my left. He was interesting. Yeah. And I would just walked away. But there's something that we just did there where now I know a little more about you because you told me that story. Now I'm going to remember that.
You know, it's called, it's not neural mapping. There's a name for it, neural mirroring.
Yeah, okay.
So there's these guys, there's a few different story sort of scholars, and they all, Paul Zak, Yuri Hassan, and Raymond Marr. I know this because I'm reading their names. But they all basically come up with the same theory on why stories, not really why stories work, but how they work. And they get this, they come, one of them calls them neural mapping, the other calls it neural coupling, neural mirroring. They're all three saying the same thing, that when you tell a story, you are, in essence, taking over the thoughts of another person's brain. In other words, I'm going to speak into your brain, and I'm going to hijack your actual thoughts. And yeah, that's how powerful stories are. It's that powerful. And so you are vicariously living through me during the time that I'm telling you this story, and your thoughts and I are the same. So my first chess move in this competition of who can explain why that worked to you, my opening move is, it works because of, I'm going to have a few other things, but one of them is connection.
Yeah.
That when you're actually like the Matrix, right? You're hooked into somebody else's thoughts, and you guys are having the same thoughts, and we are in our own bodies and in our own minds, but we are actually connected and having a simultaneous experience at the time. But that story is being told, that I'm telling you this story, and I think connection. Right? You say, well, that's not why it works. That's just connection, but connection is associated with survival. Because two people can survive better than one.
Yes.
So the more connected two people are, the more safety you feel.
Yeah.
And I posit that is one reason stories have succeeded. It's actually the way to connect cultures. There's a lot of other reasons we're going to get to.
Sure. Well, it's interesting that you said that, because some of I was doing some research and just the basic, why do stories work, asking that question. And one of the things I found was they link it back early on, beginning of man, where it was a survival mechanism.
How so?
So they would use it.
So we both are coming up with the same.
Yeah, they would use it
to
share, basically share, like, here's the information I know about surviving out here. Let me help you understand when I encounter this.
Danger over by river.
Yes. And so, exactly. And so it was a way,
big
stories
cave,
were so,
big bear.
Yes. When you walk this way, be careful type thing, And that was the way they survived. It was a massive survival mechanism.
It's also like an incredibly efficient and effective way to teach. So to your point.
100%.
I mean, one of the number one things, people send me books all the time. They're books. I'm like, hey, can you give me feedback on this book? I hate doing it.
Why?
Because if I send you a book and I want feedback on it, all I want is bad news.
Okay.
And amateurs only want affirmation.
Yeah, makes sense.
They want you to tell them that they're a secret genius. But that's not why, the only reason you're sending me a book is I'm going to tell you how to fix it. And the number one thing that needs to be fixed is you need more stories.
Yeah.
You are giving me, this is the equivalent of a keynote presentation with 37 bullet points on every slide.
I feel like I've heard you say this somewhere. I'm going to butcher this, but there's something with writing where for like is it chapters, you need to have X amount of stories? Have you said something like that before?
Probably so.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember.
The idea is more stories, more stories,
yeah,
more stories.
Yeah,
like, can you communicate this via story? By the way, most of my first drafts of any chapter, I give myself the same criticism. So I have to go back and say, okay, but can you tell that through a story? Like if you go back through my best-selling books, Building a Story Brand, Blue Like Jazz, probably twice as many stories as the other books. And I think an intellectual has a real problem with that because they're trying to disseminate knowledge, and it's knowledge that they want people to care about, and they can't. Their brains just don't work that way. They can't keep caring about this list that you've created, right? It's got to be, rather than China is eavesdropping, it's got to be. One time when I was in China, I found a bug in my phone, and there was this guy following me, got into the elevator with it. Now, you just tell me which one is more interesting,
Exactly.
right?
Yes.
That's what it is.
Yep. And you remember it.
And you remember it. That's interesting to explore that. Why do you think we remember stories so well?
Yeah, I think it goes back to that kind of like early on, like that's
It's
wired in our DNA is stories, and that's how information was, passed on. There was no such thing as books. There was no, visual medium. It was all word of mouth. That's the most powerful is when you hear that story.
It passes well. It translates well. But this is also before they could write it down.
Yes, and so it was all oral.
You had an oral.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep. Yeah, for me, I think about some of my favorite books are ones that are narrative form, and they sneak the principles of
like
the
fiction?
teaching.
You mean or actually
or
nonfiction
just
too?
like telling. Some of my favorite books are ones that tell their story, but use the story to teach you. I connect with that so much more than just here's the 5 leadership principles you should do when leading a business.
Yeah.
I want to hear about your story and how you navigated that story. Those always have connected with me far more.
Even the nonfiction ones.
Absolutely.
Those are the ones
I want.
Did you ever have you ever read Norman Mailer?
No.
Oh, you would love him.
Really? Yeah.
Oh my gosh. Well, he was a controversial dude. I mean, back in the day, like stabbed his wife
Okay.
with a ballpoint pen at a dinner party or something like that.
Who hasn't? I mean, let's be honest. Gosh, that sounds horrible.
He was just a jerk of a human being.
What did he write about?
The Executioner's Song. He
Okay.
won the Pulitzer, I think, for Executioner's Song. Might be Nobel. Somebody fact check me and then tell yourself whether I'm right. You think this is like a high budget podcast? We don't have a fact checker. Go listen to Joe Rogan.
Yeah.
We just say shit. But Norman Mailer wrote the Executioner's Song, and it was the story. Okay, here's some interesting facts.
Yeah.
You want to bullet point a keynote presentation? There was a time in this country in the 70s when a single person had not been executed in 10 years.
Really?
Yeah, like death chamber.
Yeah.
It was firing squads. So it had been 10 years. In Utah, it had been 30 years. And a guy named Gary Gilmore killed a guy. And he was executed by a firing squad. That's crazy, right? You got to put 10 people with a rifle, and they stuck him in a chair and put a pillowcase over his head. And then who knows who has the blanks or the bullet.
Oh, even more interesting.
Yeah, like super fascinating. So Norman Mailer, who was an asshole and a genius, unbelievable writer, he writes a book called The Executioner's Song. And it's about the execution of Gary Gilmore. And he does it in a style that was new in the sense that he told a true story like a novel.
Okay. Yeah.
So he went in and it's Gary, it's his girlfriend and his mom. He grew up in a trailer in Portland, Oregon. He ends up in Utah, and he ends up killing this guy. And I remember it's a big old giant book. I used to have a first edition copy. And he gets to the part where I thought, okay, this guy's a good writer. He's Hemingway-esque, way more long-winded than Hemingway, in the sense it's just like brutal short sentences. And then he gets to the part where Gary does drugs. And I got to that part of the book thinking, Norman, I don't understand why this guy won the Pulitzer. And Gary Gilmore does drugs. And for like 30 minutes, I feel high. He hijacked my freaking brain. And I felt like I was on a drug trip.
That good.
That was
that good, right?
And I'm like, okay, give this man
Yeah.
an award or something.
Did he win?
Keep him from stabbing his wife, but give him the award.
Did he win a Pulitzer?
I believe it's a Pulitzer. Yeah, I don't think he won the Nobel Prize.
Okay.
That's Steinbeck.
Yeah.
But Steinbeck's is another one. My gosh. Anyway, I digress.
Yeah.
So that brought out this whole execution topic big time, and it was because of Norman Mailer that became a national debate. He didn't really have a position, by the way, on whether we should execute people or not. But you had an enormous amount of sympathy for Gary Gilmore by the end of it, because this dude had a really screwed up life. And my point is, because he did it in a story, we actually started debating whether or not we should be bringing this back. And probably because of Executioner's Song is the reason we don't use firing squads.
Because that powerful.
It was
the way
that
he told the story.
It was that powerful.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah,
because we don't do that.
Then we started electrocuting people.
Yeah. Someone needs to write a book about that.
Yeah. Anyway.
Well, I think it. I'm as you're talking about that, I'm thinking about why do stories work. It for me, it's the human connection. It connect
humanizes.
Yeah,
an issue.
It's the if I'm staring at the TV, if I'm staring at another human, and I'm looking for how do we connect. I'm looking for their story. I'm trying to find ways that make us human. I think it's the difference between a inanimate object like this coffee cup that's sitting right next to me versus being able to connect with the story that you have. It connects us. It gives me more info about you. Those are my favorite kind of shows, documentaries.
It can devalue or value something, right? Like if you tell a story about Stalin killing all the people that he killed, Stalin used to get everybody drunk and then he would make his own leadership like dance with each other for his entertainment. Like he was a total psychopath. And you tell that story about Stalin, and even though he killed 1 million people, like you could here's what I'm saying. You could put up on a thing, here's the millions of people Stalin killed and the peasant community that he oppressed. And you'd be like, that's a bad guy. As soon as I tell you that he'd get his own leadership drunk and make them dance with each other and kiss each other for his entertainment because he wanted to feel powerful, you hate him.
Yeah.
Like when I told you he killed 1 million people, like that's a bad guy.
Yeah.
But when I actually, it's a freaking story.
Yes.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the story that does it. Equally, do you remember Pulp Fiction?
Yep.
I think Quentin Tarantino is one of the greatest storytellers alive today, and I think his dialogue is the best. He's one of the great storytellers. You got to get Spielberg and George Lucas. You got to get those guys up there. But his dialogue is better than anybody has ever written. Do you remember who was the actor in that movie with the watch, with his grandfather's watch? Christopher Walken. Christopher Walken leans down and he's talking to Bruce Willis when he's a kid. And he talks about how his dad or somebody's grandfather, I can't remember, shoves this watch up his butt to get it out of some war that he was in. I'm butchering this story. And he's holding this watch. I'm going to give you this watch. It's the story that made the freaking watch valuable, right? Yeah. It's the story behind it.
Absolutely. That's the kind of stuff I love. It's those moments where you can use the power of story to make something that's an animate object that's just a coffee mug more powerful.
Yeah.
Because I got this from somewhere. Something happened. There's a story to this.
If you don't communicate clearly, all your emails, your website, social media posts, everything you're communicating will be ignored. StoryBrand.ai is like the world's best communication expert writing it for you. Imagine having the world's best communicator writing your tagline. Just type in the name of your company, answer a few prompts, and voila. Hey, that's a good one. Use it to write your social media posts, website wireframe, emails, lead generating PDF, product or service descriptions, anything you need for your business. What would happen to your revenue if every word that left your business was crystal clear and worth paying attention to? StoryBrand.ai is your competitive advantage, so you'll say it clearly. Try it right now and let us write your custom tagline for free at StoryBrand.ai. And now back to the show.
I'm sitting with you talking, what makes a good story to you?
All right. Now we're getting into it.
Yeah.
There's a lot, but I think that essentially, like to break it down on how you actually tell a good story, it's all about opening and closing story loops. That's what it's about.
Yeah.
If you say, why do we pay attention? The human brain, by the way, here's a geek fact. Human brain spends 30% of its time daydreaming on average. When you're watching a story, none. You don't daydream. However, you're kind of daydreaming the whole time because neural mirroring takes place.
Yeah, they're taking over.
And that, like when you sit down in a movie theater and the screen goes dim, that screen starts taking over your thought. It thinks for you. It does all of the work. It thinks for you for 2 hours. And there are structures in place that have been passed down over time that probably started for the first time being written down in poetics 2,000 however many years ago, and then those practices in storytelling have gotten better and better over time until now it's really cleaned up. And they know exactly when to open the story loop and exactly when to close the story loop and when to open a subplot before you close this other story loop. And they can kind of hijack your brain really well. And there are formulas for how to do this. Now, in terms of like modern storytelling, probably Blake Snyder's book, Save the Cat, captures it the best and makes it the most accessible to anybody who wants to tell a story. The book is called Save the Cat because that's a scheme that you use inside of a plot to make people interested. You have the hero save a cat at the beginning, so that he just went with Save the Cat. Robert McKee talks about this in his book Story. Christopher Booker wrote the best book ever written, in my opinion, on story and story structure and analyzing stories. That book is called The 7 Basic Plots. He argues there are only 7 plots that work, and he unpacks all of them. Some people say there are 9, but really, the other 2 are kind of derivatives of some of the 7 that Christopher Booker talks about. But it's extremely formulaic. So at the beginning, in an Act 3 structure, you're going to have a hero. You got to do something to make us like the hero, i.e. save the cat, and then that hero is going to be thrown into an inciting incident. They have a stable life that is suddenly unstable, right? They're in a car accident. Their kid is, if you're Liam Neeson, your kid was kidnapped.
Yep.
You're an alcoholic, and somebody knocks on your door. It's Child Protective Services, and they're bringing you a kid that you didn't know you had, and you got to clean up your life. I mean, I'm describing so many stories right now.
So many movies,
Yeah, you're 40 pounds overweight. You're walking through the grocery store. You just got divorced, and the love of your life, girl who you had in high school, walks in. She's a yoga instructor, and she makes a passing comment of like, "I'd love to see you again," and then you're like, "Okay, I got to lose 40 pounds." Now I got a movie about a guy who has to lose 40 pounds. It's the inciting incident.
That's right.
And then it goes all the way through sort of the, Act 1, Act 2, Act 3, midpoint climax, the all is lost moment, all that kind of stuff. But it's very, very formulaic. There are geniuses who can play with the formulas. You really can't break them. Megalopolis was the last movie I saw that me and a buddy walked out of it because it was so bad.
Yeah.
Because who did The Godfather? Was
our resident?
It wasn't Scorsese, was it? Who? Francis Ford Coppola. It's supposed to be his genius movie. His swan
that's
song.
right. Yeah.
Holy crap, that was awful.
Yeah.
I was embarrassed for Adam Driver and all the other. John Voight is in it.
But it's because they told a bad story.
They didn't use it. They didn't use the formulas at all. He was so arrogant and conceited. It was awful, awful, awful movie.
Yeah.
In fact, Thad, my buddy, and I were there, and I'm going, if I was alone, I'd walk out of this, but my buddy Thad is with me. I convinced him to come see it, and he actually goes, "Do you know what's happening?" And I lean over and I go, "I know that the Seahawks are on television and that there's a sports bar called the Crow's Nest across the street." And Thad just got up.
And you told a better story in that moment.
Well, not only we went to the football. We're going to do an episode on football.
Yeah.
And I'm going to talk about how it works in terms of story structure to keep you hooked.
Okay. So you open a story loop. Okay. So
it's all opening and closing of story loops is what makes you interested in the story.
Can I take us in a little bit of a right turn? How is storytelling evolved with social media? Have you noticed that?
Gosh, that's
Have you noticed that?
I think social media can't tell a full 3-act story. So it's likely, this is a good question. I haven't thought about it, but I would say that a good social media post that goes viral is either opening or closing a story loop. So like I had one on how to deal with a narcissist, and it got 11 million. I mean, it's probably 20 million views by now. I don't really know. That was powerful because it closed a very emotionally charged story loop for some people. In other words, like if they're dealing with a narcissist and they don't realize it's a narcissist, and I come on and I say, "Here's how a narcissist is going to react when you do this," all of a sudden they go, "I have been aching to figure out what was going on with that dude, and that dude is a narcissist." Yeah. And so, but if I would have done that by saying like, "Here's 3 reasons that people are narcissists," I don't know if it would have closed an emotional story loop. So they all had an open story loop in their mind, and I closed it.
Yeah, that's interesting. Actually, that kind of makes me. There's so many things to think about that, because even if you're like writing a book, that's a direction you could actually take a book in.
On
leadership, Where rather than you're trying to introduce principles, you're trying to help people close story loops that they have open about leadership.
Well, there's a lot of books that have sold a lot of copies. I mean, Who's Pulling My Strings is a book about closing the story loops that narcissists have opened in your life. And
Boundaries.
It's sold a lot of copies. Boundaries is closing story loops.
Have you ever
7 Habits of Highly Effective People is closing a story loop of how can I make my life more effective, right?
Have you ever heard of the trend Get Ready With Me on like TikTok, Instagram? So there are people who will record themselves getting ready for the day. And there's a couple of them who've like just taken off. And so think about...
Are they editing it or were they just
No, there's some that...
closet?
Well, even the guy you brought up yesterday, the YouTuber, Sam, I'm going to butcher his last name, Solodek or something. The guy who works out.
The guy who he's the biggest
massive
physical fitness
YouTuber
guy.
But these girls who usually do this, they do the makeup or something like that. They're called Get Ready With Me videos. And they sit there for sometimes an hour while they're doing their makeup telling stories. And that's
is it the stories that are hooking?
It's
or
the stories.
So is it like people don't want to be alone, and so
it's the stories they're talking about? You know what they're doing that day, or what they did the night before, or whatever it is. They're just storytelling.
Okay, this might be a little bit of a tangent, but I saw something on Instagram that said if you want to build a following on Instagram, there are only 3 reasons people want to follow you, and the 3 reasons are: 1, they want to sleep with you.
Yeah.
2, they want to be your friend, or 3, they want to be you. So if you want to grow a following, be somebody that people either want to sleep with, be somebody that seems like I would love to have that person as a friend, or 3, or be somebody that other people want to be.
And tell that story.
Yeah. Well, I don't know if it's a story, but it's like I wonder if that doesn't play into the ladies in their closet.
I think it does. I think 100% does, because
like that's their friend. That's their,
it actually nails both sides. I want to be you, and I also want to be your friend.
Yeah,
you know,
we didn't even get into like the importance, the characteristics of a hero that works.
Oh my goodness, there's so many angles. Well, and I think that's why, you know, if you look at it across every single, whether it be marketing, TV, daily life, relationships, most of it revolves around story.
Yeah,
and that's why I would say stories work.
I think, to narrow down my position on why stories work,
your thesis,
they offer 3 things.
Okay.
Connection, which we talked about, neural mirroring. So I'm connected to somebody. They also, and Robert McKee talks about this in his book Story, it explains the world. Oh. And what he means by that is when I tell a story, I am giving you my position on what matters, what's worth pursuing, what needs to be avoided, who's bad, who's good. It's a mental map. It explains where I am in this sort of construct of social interaction that we're having in this world.
Yes.
And all of that is interesting for another reason. It is because knowing where I am on the map and not being alone comforts me. And it does another thing, prepares me against a threat. So that is my explanation that I posit to you on why stories took off. They comfort us and they prepare us. So the underlying issue behind stories is that it's all connected to my survival.
Yep. And
it's going to help me survive.
And I love what you said. It helps us make sense of the world.
Yeah. Well, that's Robert McKee.
Yeah,
says that. It's connection, sense making, comfort, and survival.
Yep.
All right. Here's a question.
Okay.
I went down this tangent. How did Jim Jones, Guyana, cult leader out of San Francisco, who killed all those people, how did he use story? Let me just ask you this. How was, without story, those people he used story to basically create a horrible tragedy.
Yes.
And I think all cult leaders do it.
Yeah.
And I actually think, I agree with some people who think that the Republican and Democratic Party acts more like a cult these days than it does like parties that are trying to get things, like trying to fill potholes and stuff.
Yeah.
You know,
they definitely use story to do that.
They use story.
Yeah.
But it's cult leaders are inviting people into a story in which they play an important role. And so I went back and I kind of looked at what Jim Jones did. He created a compelling origin story. He portrayed himself as sort of a misunderstood child, that he had special abilities, you know, and that he fostered sort of an intrigue and a sense of destiny. There's something special about him, right? So he's not just the storyteller, he's the Christ figure. And you actually look at David Koresh, and he said he was Christ, right? And then you look at Mao Zedong, Christ figure.
Yeah.
You look at Xi Jinping, Christ figure. Quite honestly, you look at sort of Barack Obama, Donald Trump, there's a sort of like, Donald Trump actually says, I am the chosen one.
Yeah.
Now, I'm not saying he's being manipulative, because maybe he is the chosen one to fix whatever. I don't know.
Well,
but there's something that we're drawn to.
He'll go as far as even saying they come after me because they want to get to you. So there's that kind of savior complex.
Right. He's the one who's going to rescue you. Yes. So that's the other thing that's necessary in a story is a threat. So you have to have a utopian society that I'm going to build, a grand vision for the future. I saw this on Instagram the other day. It was one of the reasons your wife has lost interest in you is you are not offering any sort of vision of a better future.
Yeah.
And so she's, and I'm like, well, that's for husbands too, probably.
Yeah.
And it's also for kids. Like if you're a dad, because I'm a dad, so I'm speaking to dads. I'm not saying this is only for dads. But a vision for your family's future is massive. Even if it's just like, we're going to go to Disney World or something.
I'd call it like an adventure.
Yeah. An adventure that has something.
You've lost. I've got buddies that have lost adventure in their life.
So let me be clear. I'm not trying to say we as dads can learn a lot from Jim Jones.
Yeah.
I was just talking about how story structure works.
We as dads can learn a lot from stories.
Yeah, from stories. But Jim offered like a utopian society. David Koresh did the same thing. And then fear and apocalyptic things. This is where I would not say we should do this as dads, by the way. But creating an urgency that is dependent on your leadership. This is massive. It's an urgency that is dependent on a strong man to get us through this. And then a sort of, he did a lot of like ritualized loyalty. So he would ritualize, they did suicide drills. And so he was practicing.
And
he like was warming them up to actually go through with it someday. Because if you think about it, if he didn't ritualize and do suicide drills, ritualized loyalty is really important.
Yeah, that's what he was checking, yeah.
But it also creates an us versus them mentality. It blurs. It's very hard for the human brain to know what's real and what's not real when you give them a story. It's the story. I've always thought this is kind of interesting. With a lot of people, once you tell them a story, even if it's fiction, it's hard for them not to believe it's real, and even if they know it's not real, they'll suspend disbelief and act that way anyway. Let me ask you this: why do you think like people dress up as characters and go to Comic-Con?
Wow, I mean, it's the mirroring of joining in on you're in the story now.
Yeah, I'm something in there. I don't know what it is. Yeah, I'm in the story. I'm blurring fiction from reality. I'm actually dressing up as this
escaping
person,
to that place.
Escaping my own. And you know what I think it is? They are attracted to. A role that is better than the role they're playing in the world.
They're being called into that story, and that it's an identity they're putting on.
It's an identity
that they don't. It's almost like they use this might be a little overgeneralization, but it's like the putting on the costume allows them to be someone else, and they can kind of hide behind that, in the story. Yeah.
I think that, I don't know, what's your takeaway from all the kind of looking at it that you did? Like, how does it change the way you live when you say, why do stories work?
I think the biggest thesis I would walk away with is when I worked on this was, what story am I calling, what we talked about, what am I calling my family into?
Yeah, really?
What story am I living out?
What did you do about that? Did you do anything, or are you not? You need to know you need to do something.
I know a little bit of both. I'm doing something in the way of like how we're even operating day to day, but also I'm still thinking on like, you've challenged me a lot in the way that your family has a mission statement.
Yeah.
Kind of this is what we do. So I'm thinking about that for the new year. And I'm thinking about what adventure am I calling my girls into, on a daily basis.
Well, if you give those girls a role to play in a really great story, you know what happens? Some asshole comes along and when they go to college who has a role to play, and that role is to serve them and serve their needs and whatever. And because they've played a better role that you created, they're just like, you're full of shit, dude.
I'm out.
I am not. Yeah, like, are you kidding me?
That's what I want.
I think it's like self-esteem. Right? It's like, are you kidding me? This role that you want me to play with you is so beneath me that I cast you in my mind as a fool.
Yeah, and that's how powerful
it is.
Calling into that identity.
And that's where we talk about structuring story and living into them in a way that changes the world for the better.
That's right.
And I think that's what the call of every leader.
Yeah.
Every leader is to say, this crap we've been doing is totally beneath our humanity. You are the pinnacle of God's creation.
That's right.
And we are going to do something really good. And here's what we're going to do.
I think that's, if I had to wrap this episode up, it would be that. Stories are powerful. You can use them in you can use them for their power in a positive way or a negative way. And then the other thing I'm walking away with is I got to think about this more, was when you said some things work because you're helping people close story loops.
Oh yeah.
And that's,
well, when somebody wants to write a book or whatever, I say to them, the books that do the best and are most appreciated and respected are books that solve a specific problem. What problem does your book solve? And if they can't answer that book's not going to, they're going to have trouble writing it, and it's not going to sell.
And that's not just for books. That's for
everything.
Everything. Yes.
Well, I think it's true of just even when you talk about your value as a person, that, God loves us unconditionally. People love conditionally. So let's not try to get mad because people aren't God. That's a really unfair thing to say. So if you want to fit in with people, be useful.
Yeah.
And my question is, what problem do you solve?
What problem you solve, yeah.
Like, do you solve the problem of disloyal friends? If you solve the problem of disloyal friends, you're going to have a lot of friends.
Yeah. Because
right?
you're loyal.
Yeah.
That's the problem.
If you solve the problem, women, I think, want to be involved in an emotionally interesting and engaging story. And listen to my single dudes out there. You cast a vision for your future that is emotionally interesting and engaging and adventurous, but also safe. You're going to have a great time.
Yep.
You're going to have a lot of trouble.
You're going to say you're going to have a great life.
You are going to have a great life because you're going to attract a really amazing woman.
Absolutely.
And by the way, I think women are the same way.
Yeah.
Like if you are living a story where you have a lot of problem with men and men are the villain, good luck ever having a healthy relationship with a strong. You're going to find weak men who want you to be mommy.
Yep.
And their mom was a horrible person, and they're now trying to mend that relationship through you. That's never going to work.
Yeah.
So actually just think about what use am I? What vision am I heading toward? What role are other people playing in my life? And if they're playing a really noble role toward a great cause, I think you're going to have a great life.
Well, as cheesy as it sounds, what story are you living? Are you living a good one?
Yeah, what story are you living?
Or a bad one?
Yeah. Let's end with this.
Yeah,
The point is, if you do not decide what the story you're living in is, and what role you're going to play, and what important and noble role other people are going to play in your story, and by the way, you're playing a role in their story too, so it goes both ways. Other people are going to dictate your story.
That's right.
And those people are going to be political parties, corporations, right? Religion, all of that stuff, and all the roles you're going to play in their story are going to benefit them.
Yep, that's right.
It's going to benefit them.
That's right. You're right, 100%.
Yeah.
That's
and
great.
so it's your fault. It's your fault your story sucks. You let somebody else take it over.
Yep.
And you played a Pong.
And the great part is you can start living a great story today.
Thanks for listening to the Why That Worked podcast presented by StoryBrand.ai. If you like the show, follow wherever you get your podcasts. And if you're enjoying this on YouTube, hit that subscribe button and leave a comment letting us know what you think and what you want the guys to talk about in a future episode. Curious about how StoryBrand.ai can help you create clear, effective messaging? Well, you can try it out right now and create a free customized tagline for your business. Just go to StoryBrand.ai. Thanks for listening, and we'll see you next time.